Good evening. My name is Michael Randolph. I'm the host for tonight's presentation on mastering funding and program design. So here's our legal and copyright notice. In short, unauthorized reproduction of this material is strictly prohibited. The state of nonprofit between 2025 and the end of 2026. 50% of nonprofits will close their doors within the next 12 months. One third of nonprofits lost funding in 2025, and 43.5% operate with no paid staff. Let's talk about the economic impact in terms of funding. Let's start with job loss spike. 30 or close to 4,000 jobs were lost in May alone. Now, let's talk about the inflationary pressures. Economic uncertainty is shrinking private giving. Funding declines. In the first quarter of 2025, between 5 to 10% of nonprofits saw a decline in their major donor contribution. Keep in mind, this is at the beginning of the first quarter of 2024. By the end of that quarter, this percent went from 10% to up to 30%. Our mission and vision. Well, our mission is to empower organizations driving meaningful community change by fostering growth and sustainability. Our vision is to focus on creating positive change through empowered nonprofits. So, what are some of our core specializations? Let's start with the first one. First, program development. By program development, I mean designing programs aligned with community needs and sustainability. Neighborhood planning, advancing inclusive, resident-driven revitalization, especially in marginalized communities. Social entrepreneurship, building earned income strategies for financial independence. And finally, best practices, developing scalable approaches that elevate nonprofit standards. Well, let's talk about our impact. We have affected by providing services by way of virtual training to nonprofits throughout the United States. As a matter of fact, over 3,500 nonprofits, businesses, faith communities, individuals, and others have benefited from our classes in over 35 different states. Also, we assisted over 500 plus nonprofits in those 37 states and preparing the paperwork to start that nonprofit. Nationally speaking, we engage in community initiatives supporting housing, workforce development, economic development, health modes, and other areas of enhancing the quality of life in poor communities. Definition of a professional nonprofit. Well, the legal definition is a tax-exempt entity designed to advance the public good. What are the core missions? Typically they fall within charitable, education, science, religion, or literature. What about the financial model? Revenue is reinvested into programs to maximize community impact. So let's talk about the three stages of nonprofit development, starting with stage one, which is the emergent stage. During this stage, you're establishing your legal structure, you're defining your missions and your values, and you're launching initial programs. Stage two. Stage two is the intermediate stage. This is when you're strengthening your human resource system, you're formalizing your internal policies, and you're improving program evaluation. The final stage, stage three, is the advanced stage. This is when you're scaling program geographically, you're diversifying funding sources, and you're enhancing financial systems. So let's talk about grants and the different types of grants. The first type of grant is known as unrestricted grant. These grants fund general operating support with flexible use. Restricted grants, and by far most grants are restricted. Restricted grants are specific project grants with measurable outcome. The next type of grant is called capital grants, funding for facilities, renovations, and major equipment. And then finally, matching grants. Funds released once the required funding dollars are secured. For example, you write a grant for 100,000 and they say we'll give you 80,000. Now you have to come up with the remaining 20,000. That's when we will release our funding. So let's talk about grant profiles, pros and cons. By far the largest number of folks that give money is individuals like you and I. The advantage is that it's a major resource of giving. The disadvantage is it's difficult to cultivate for beginners. Next is foundation. Advantage is large award, clear guidelines. The disadvantage is that it's limited access. But we're going to tell you how to gain access. And then there's corporation. These can be reoccurring gifts possible. The disadvantage is they rarely ongoing. It's rarely ongoing indefinitely. At some point, they don't give you no money. And then finally, government. Well, what can I say? The government's not giving as much as it did for special cause, but they have very large awards amount, and the disadvantage is that it's complex reporting required. So let's talk about the grant tool, research tool. The first is called core platforms. This is SANS, for example, and grant.gov. Both SANS.gov and grants.gov focus on federal grants. The next platform is called Candid, directory online. This is one of the most comprehensive grant search sites that's out there. And then, of course, you have AI and smart research. Utilizing AI, grant matching, and predictive analyst tools. Again, predictive analyst tools. And then finally, you got specialized database like Instruments, Grant Station, and Grant Forward is among those specialized. I use Grant Station because it's cheaper than Candid, but Candid is by far the best site to go for money. There's literally thousands of funders that's out there. So, what do funders consider when they give grants? Well, first they want to know what is your sustainable financial model? How is your organization different than another nonprofit? What hard and soft data support your position of the need and the problem? In this particular respect, you're going to be talking about using both quantitative and qualitative research. We're going to talk about that later on in the presentation on how you present, your data and your position of need. And then next is what are your measurable tools that you're going to use? For example, we want to talk later on about your logic model and your theory of change. And then next, reason for starting a nonprofit. And then after that, people want to know what do you value? And then network, partnership, and collaboration. I cannot only overemphasize network, partnership, and collaboration. That's what funders want to see. And then, and this is why one of the most important things that funders look for is your accounting practice. All in all, they're looking for a proposal that's feasible, plausible, sustainable, sellable, and fundable. Now, let's start with the statement of the problem. If you have no statement, if you have no problem, you have no money. So, what is the purpose of a statement of the problem? Well, it defines the need behind the proposal and the condition you aim to change. So, what are the requirements? Well, it must be evidence based, supported by expert insight, backed by data, and describe needs in human terms. So, how do we gather this information and make an argument for the statement of the problem? There are basically two strategies that's used in terms of research methodology. The first is called qualitative research. This type of research focuses on words, experience, and why people think or have or behave a different way. It consists of interviews, focus groups, and narrative analysis. Quantitative research. This focuses on numbers and measurable data. It focuses on how much or how often. It uses surveys and statistical analysts. I know I'm not pronouncing that word right. So let's talk about program design essential. Well, first, purpose. Explain how your project is carried out and why the approach is effective. During this phase, you're going to talk about what you plan to do, give a breakdown on your first 30, 60, 90, on up to 12 months when you begin to talk about your part of your program design. Components. Your components should be clear description of intervention, staffing structure, and milestones. And lastly, alignment. Must integrate community input and maintain cultural relevancy. So let's talk about the evaluation framework. That is purpose. Demonstrate if programs achieve outcome and support accountability. Let me say that. The purpose is to demonstrate a program to achieve the outcomes and support accountability. Let's talk about the different stages. The first stage is input. For example, what do you need to get the job done? Staff, a building, um, um, program materials, etc. The second is activities. What activities are going to come out of the input? As the activities come output, how many people are going to be served? As the outputs come outcomes, what is going to be the outcome of these services being provided? And then finally, impact. So let's look at this. You got a person that is going, you got a training program for a person that's going to get that GED. The activities that you're going to use include giving tests and training them on how to pass the GED. The output would be like 5 people pass the course, 100 people. The outcome is that because that person has that GED, now he's in a better position to get a job. The impact is now this person is able to not only get a job, but to be a productive member in society. So that's the evaluation stages: input, activities, output, outcomes, and impact. Now let's talk about the different types of evaluations. The first type of evaluation is what's known as a logic model. In other words, it's called outcome-based evaluation. In outcome-based evaluation, we start first with the goal. In this case, they want to reduce the number of pregnancy for at-risk girls ages 10 to 14. So that being said, now you begin to talk about how you plan to do it. First, we start, as you can see in the first column, we start with the process / objectives, or the what we plan to do. Next is the activities, or how do we plan to do it. The next column is responsible parties, that is, who's going to do what. The next column is expected outcome, or in other words, the why. Then comes your indicator and your measurements. In other words, where's your evidence? Then we come to data sources. Where can I find out this information? And finally, timeline. When is everything going to be done from start to end? The next type of evaluation is called a theory of change, or in other words, a process-based evaluation. Process-based evaluations process-based evaluation focus on understand how a program works and how it produces results. It breaks it into 3 categories. First is the community problem / need. The second section is the specific intervention that you plan to take. And finally, the last column is the intended outcome that you plan to bring about. And finally, the last evaluation is a goal-based evaluation. So what is it? It's an approach that examines how well a program is achieving its predetermined goals and objectives. If the focus is on measuring progress against what the program set out to accomplish. So what are the core components? Well, you have your goals and objectives. That's the intended output and measurable outcome. You have your process and objectives. That is what the program does to reach its goal. You have your evaluation, that is ongoing assessment of implementation and results. And finally, you have your outcomes, the actual change or benefit produced. So evaluation evaluation compare plan goals with actual outcomes using data from activities and process to determine effective and guided improvements. Okay, let's talk about your 5-year strategic plan. This is when we talked earlier, when we talked about stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. This is stage 3 in terms of one of the things that you need to have in place. So when we talk about the 5-year strategic plan and the different components, the first component is the environmental scheme. That is community needs. SWOT analysts, and external trends. Then we go to priorities. You should have 3 to 5 long-term goals, and you should have strategic objective. The next component is operation. This is when you're using SMART objective, staffing systems, and KPS. And then finally, governance that deals with risk mitigation and board development. SWOT analysis. What is it? Well, it is strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Let's start with the strengths. The strengths we need internal areas where you excel or have unique resources. Weakness. Weakness, we're talking about areas need improvement or where resources are limited. Opportunity. Opportunity, we mean positive external openings or trends you can leverage. And then finally, threats. Threats, we talk about external conditions or competitive pressures that might hinder progress. Entrepreneurship plan. What is it? Well, it's generating earned income while pursuing for social impact. That's the definition. Let's talk about independence. Independence means that revenue support mission-driven activities and reduce reliance on single funding sources. And finally, strategy. Blend charitable contribution, earned income, and public subsidy into a sustainable, long-living funding approach. So let's talk about the budget. And the budget is broken up into 2 primary categories. The first is direct costs. This is salaries and wages, consultants and contractors, equipment and supplies, and program-specific expenses. The next is indirect costs, operational overhead, accounting and admin, facilities and utilities, and everything is calculated as a percentage. Okay, let's talk about federal grants language. As you know, there's a whole new language that we have to use when we're going after grants now. So let's talk about the old language and then let's talk about the new language. The old language is at-risk population. The new language is historically excluded. The old language is underserved. The new language is documented disparities. The old language is disadvantage. The new language is strength-based framing. The old language is deficit framing. And the new language is reservoir-centered. So, okay, let's talk about AI. I know we've been hearing a lot about AI, but AI could be a big plus for nonprofits. Let's talk about the different stages or different components that AI can have on increasing your capacity and making you a lean machine. First is fundraising. That is predictive analytics to identify donor patterns and behavior. The next is communications, drafting personalized messages to increase engagement. Next is task automation, handling data entry, scheduling, and volunteer coordination. The next component of AI is data insight, analyzing program data for trend forecasting. And then content generation. That is AI assists grant writing and social media marketing. And the next, program delivery. With chat or with AI, you have 24/7 chat block support and language translation. No matter what time of the day or night, there's always someone there in AI to handle your problem and troubleshoot and find a solution. Board development, best practices. The reason why I emphasize board development is because a lot of funders look as to whether or not that board is getting training every year on the latest policies and procedures and the latest approaches for nonprofit. The first column deal with diverse expertise. You want to recruit members from very skills, that is legal, finance, marketing, and community connection. This diversity is not necessary when you're first getting started and you have little or no money. But as you begin to grow, you want to take these into consideration. Next, clear roles. Define expectation, term limits, and responsibility and board governance policies. Next, regular training. I can't overemphasize that. Provide ongoing education on nonprofit law, fiduciary duties, and strategic planning. And next, engagement. Foster active participation through committee work, fundraising, and advocacy effort. Next, effective fundraising strategy. Let's start with donor cultivation. Build relationship through personalized communication and stewardship. Multi-channel appeals. Use email, social media, events, and direct mail for broader reach. Next, monthly giving programs. Establish reoccurring donor programs for stable and predictable revenue. And finally, grant diversification. Apply to multi-funding sources to reduce dependency on single grants. Volunteer management. Why is it important? Well, you might not know this, but what funders look for is how many volunteers do you have? How many people is willing to work for your cause free of charge. In that particular respect, there are three elements relevant to volunteer management. The first is called recruitment. By recruitment, we mean using social media, community events, and volunteer platforms to attract diverse talent. Onboarding, what does that mean? Provide orientation, training, and clear role expectation from day one. And finally, recognition. Celebrate contributions. Contributions through awards, social recognition, and appreciation events. Risk management. Well, how do we deal with that? First, under physical control, implement dual signature, regular audits, and segregation of duties. Legal compliance, maintain insurance cover, annual filing, and employment law adherence. Crisis management, crisis planning. Develop a consistency plan for fund and loss, leadership transition, and emergencies. Community engagement. A lot of groups do not include this component when they go out there and they want to save the world. So let's talk about what is some really doable, recognizable, respectable community engagement strategy. First thing you want to do is a need assessment. Conduct surveys, focus groups, and interviews to understand what are the community priorities. Partnerships, collaboration with local organizations, schools, and businesses for greater impact. And next, inclusive planning. Ensure diverse voices, especially marginalized groups, shape program design. And then finally, feedback loops. Create ongoing channels for community input and program improvement. Marketing and communication. Very important because if nobody knows who you are and where you are, you can't get no customers. Let's talk about the two different types of strategy. First, let's talk about the digital strategy. Here, we're talking about website optimization, social media presence, email campaigns, and contact marketing. Now, let's talk about brand development, consistent messaging, visual identity, storytelling approach, and impact reporting. Financial sustainability models. We talk a lot of time, earn income, everything financial in this presentation. Now we're going to wrap it up with financial sustainability model. Well, the first is called your earned income model, the most important model. This is fee-for-service programs, social enterprise ventures, or consulting. This is when you begin to charge prices for product and services that you're going to render. The next is empowerment building, long-term investment funds providing stable annual distribution. And then finally, plan giving, bequests, charitable trusts, and legacy donation programs. Management or data management and impact management. So there's three different columns that we want to look at. The first is called data collection. And we can collect data from client intake forms, from program participation tracking, or outcome surveys. Next, analytical tools. We can use CRM system, data visualization, and impact dashboard. And then finally, reporting. This includes funding reports, annual impact statement, and community updates. Partnership development is important. We talked earlier about what funders want to see. They want to see partnership. Let's talk about those partnerships. So strategic alignment. Identify organizations with complementary missions and shared value. Memorandum of understanding. Formalize partnership with clear roles, expectations, and outcomes. And finally, collective impact. Join coalitions and networks working towards common goals. Advocacy and public policy. Okay, let's start with policy research. Understand current legislation affecting your mission and your clientele. Grassroots mobilization. Engage community members in advocacy, campaign, and petition. Coalition building. Partner with other organizations to exemplify policy influence. Direct engagement. Meet with elected officials and testify at public hearings. Okay, that brings us to the conclusion. Thank you for staying. And this is our overview course. However, we do have a structured 10-lesson training program covering government, foundation, and corporate grant plus. Keep in mind, grant writers, if you're beginning a grant writer, you can make $500 on your first grant. If you're midway grant writer, that means intermediate grant writer, you can make anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500. If you're a seasoned grant writer, you can make anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000. And as a consultant grant writer, you can make anywhere from $50 to $150 an hour. So I hope this workshop has given you some insights on this new environment that we're in. The bottom line is that by looking at what's ahead of us and the planning ahead, you can be one of those nonprofits that survived this crisis in 26 and 27. If you want to reach us, you can reach me at any of these numbers, not Tampa, Baltimore, or New York number, or you can email us at mikeconsultant@gmail.com. And let me give you another email, Center for Nonprofit and Community @gmail.com. That's Center for Nonprofit and Community @gmail.com. Do not put in Center for Nonprofit and Community Development @gmail.com. Put in Center for Nonprofit and Community @gmail.com, although the name of our organization is the Center for Nonprofit and Community Development. I hope this has been helpful to you. We've had nonprofits to take part in these classes from around the country. I have nonprofits that started with nothing. And in 3 years, they were pulling in 250, 450, 500,000 a year. At the end of the day, I can teach you how to do it, but you have to do it. I can only give you insight on how to do it, but then you have to take it up and do it. Thank you again for taking